I'm going to introduce these fine gentlemen in a second, but I'd like to just kind of open up with a statement that the past 15 months obviously will not be forgotten as the spread of COVID-19 and society's reaction to the virus have really combined to devastate the global economy. The reversal of this devastation will most likely be measured in years. There have been some significant downturns over the past 40 years, and with the benefit of hindsight, each has really presented a wonderful investment opportunity, including in the hotel sector. It appears that this downturn may very well produce a period that rivals the very best in both returns and depth of opportunity. Hotels have been one of the hardest hit sectors by the coronavirus pandemic, given the widespread reduction in corporate, group, and leisure travel, as well as international travel inbound to the United States. Like many prior downturns, many anticipate, and we're starting to see, a fair amount of distress, which are going to produce increasing levels of loan defaults, which are likely to continue for some time to come. With that, I'd like to conclude by saying that America's hotel industry has a proven track record of resiliency. The fact is that over a long-term basis, commercial real estate, and particularly hotels, offer superior risk-adjusted yields when compared to other investment classes focused on value-add opportunities. So thank you for indulging me in that. We are very fortunate, and I am very appreciative to have two industry very influential and respected hotel sector luminaries. Chip Rogers. Chip serves as the president and CEO of the American Hotel and Lodging Association, also known by the acronym AHLA. It's the country's only national association dedicated to serving the interests of the entire lodging industry. In addition to the AHLA, Chip is a member of the board of directors for the United States Travel Association, Community Leaders of America, and the California Hotel and Lodging Association. Prior to joining the hospitality industry, Chip served in the General Assembly of the state of Georgia, where he was elected to office 6 times and was unanimously elected twice as Senate Majority Leader. Biren Patel. 2020/21 chairman of the Asian American Hotel Owners Association, also known by the acronym AHOA, the world's largest hotel owners association. He's also a partner in BHP Investment Company out of Irving, Texas, which owns and operates multiple branded and independent lodging properties. Biren is a native of Birmingham, England, a second-generation hotelier. His family moved to Texas in 1980. They purchased a small independent property, which served as both a place of business and a home for his family and his business to grow. Biren is a true American success story. His education in the hospitality industry began as a youth, where he worked in his family hotels after school and on weekends. And he started out checking in guests, doing laundry, sweeping the parking lot, et cetera, et cetera. So he really knows the industry from the ground up. Gentlemen, welcome.
Yeah, great to see you. Great to see Biren, as always. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you,
so maybe we could just start off, Chip. I gave a little bit of your background. If you want to embellish a little bit further, but talk about how you got to where you are now.
Well, it's been an interesting background to transition from private sector to public sector and back to private sector. As you can tell by the 2-to-1 ratio there, I much prefer the private sector. I feel like I did my time in elected office. I enjoyed it while I had the opportunity. It was the honor of a lifetime. But people aren't meant to stay in elected office for a long time. And it'd be nice if a lot of elected officials followed that same pathway. But then I spent many years working with Biren and thousands of colleagues at AHOA and truly enjoyed that. And so That was an incredible life experience as well. And, Biren's story, while something that absolutely we should champion, is one that is told quite often in the world of AHOA, of really the true American success story of people who had language barriers, financial barriers, but really wanted to use the opportunity that America provides to create something special. And that's your typical AHOA member, somebody who's done something like that. So spent many years there. And then the last 2.5 years now have had the incredible opportunity to lead the American Hotel and Lodging Association. And it's been a joy. People ask me all the time, what's it been like? I'm like, well, the first year that I was president of AHLA was arguably the best year on record in hospitality, 2019. And the second year that I was president of AHLA was undoubtedly the worst year ever in hospitality, 2020. And so we're hoping that 2021 is at least in the middle of those two, and only getting better. But honored to be in this industry, to do my part in helping to lead it, and to be part of this program today.
Thank you, Chip. That was great. And I would like to just say that while some of your predecessors have also been terrific stewards of the AHLA, the sector has been and continues to be extremely blessed to currently have you in the role that you're in. You've been doing tremendous work for the sector, and I know many are grateful for that.
Thank you so much.
Biren, you want to give us, if you want to elaborate a little bit more on your background and how you ended up where you are?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thank you for the warm welcome. I want to thank CRE for giving this opportunity for me to be on this webinar with a good friend of mine, Chip. Obviously, who he stated that we've worked together at AHOA. So, as you stated, Dan, I grew up in the industry, second generation hotelier, did my undergrad at the University of Texas in Austin in finance, did my MBA here in Dallas, and then just kind of went into the family business. And I'm the only sibling in the family that kind of joined the business. So to kind of elevate the portfolio, I decided to join associations like AHOA. And I was an ambassador for the association in 2011. Then I ran for a position for the regional director position in 2014, which I got elected to. And then in 2017, I became an officer. And then in the heat of the pandemic, I was transitioned into the chairman role. And so as Chip mentioned that, the first year he was at HLA was totally different than the second year. Last June when I became the chairman of AHOA, we were in the heat of the pandemic. And I tell myself that even though I was dealt this hand, I'd rather have myself than anyone else leading a hotel owners association during this tough time.
Terrific. Thank you. Maybe you could both now just, briefly describe your respective organizations' functions within the U.S. lodging industry and what each of the groups have accomplished during the past year for your respective membership. So, Chip, maybe we can start with you.
Thanks, Dan. Sorry, I have to keep clicking my mute button because this air conditioning here, it's like I mentioned earlier, it's getting hot in Washington, D.C. now. The air conditioning keeps kicking on and it's a little loud, so I apologize. I'll speak over it. So, look, I get it's incredible to get to work with what I would say is the cross section of the entire hospitality community, from all the major brands which are represented by AHLA. I think the top 15 largest brands in the U.S., which comprise about 99% of all branded hotels, are members of AHLA, to thousands and thousands of owners, many of whom are actually AHOA members, to management companies, the largest to the smallest in our industry, to vendors, those who supply goods and services. And so you get to hear everything from every angle and kind of get what I would say is a complete picture of what's happening in our industry, where we've been, where we are, and where we're headed. And so what we do at AHLA is a lot on the advocacy side. That's at the federal level here in Washington, D.C., but also at the state and local level, in partnering with almost all 50 state lodging associations, and in fact, in some states, more than one lodging association, and making sure that not only are we keeping an eye on what's happening here in Washington, D.C., and pushing things like the Save Hotel Jobs Act and PPP and things like that, which we'll talk about later, but also really getting down to the local level and fighting against terrible ordinances in places like San Francisco and Honolulu and Phoenix and places like that. And so we really work the breadth of politics from the smallest to the largest. We have a lot of working relationships, contractual relationships with lobbyists that are on the ground and in large cities and in state legislatures. And so we're always doing that. And then the other side of what we do in being the voice of the industry is the research that people want to know about our industry. We consider ourselves to hopefully be the expert on it, but we have a lot of resources out there that we're pulling from, and job training through our foundation. So we have a certification program that we run through the Department of Labor contracts with us. We partner with the National Restaurant Association. We give away $1.5 million a year in student scholarships to about anywhere from 400 to 600 recipients every year that are studying hospitality. We have an opportunity youth program. We're going into the inner cities and working with young people that have dropped out of school that might have the ability to join our industry and see this incredible opportunity. We're working with them to get them placed in a position after a couple of months of training. And so we're really doing a lot of things, but if I really boiled it down, it's advocacy on one side and workforce and education on the other side.
That's great. Thank you so much. Baron, maybe you could talk a little bit about AHOA and some of the accomplishments that have been achieved over the past year for the membership.
Yeah, so AHOA is the largest hotel owners association in the country. We nearly represent 20,000 hoteliers who own more than half of the hotels in the United States. You know, our mission is, if I sum it up, is basically to advance and protect the business interests of hotel owners through things like Chip mentioned, advocacy, industry leadership, professional development, member benefits, and community engagement. And just this past year, we have created another strategic plan for the next 3 years after coming out of this pandemic that will hopefully guide us to the road to recovery and to even bigger and better things. And our vision is basically to be the foremost resource and advocate for America's hotel owners. You know, Dan, last February, March, when this pandemic started, you know, we've all had to pivot. And just like everyone else, AHOA pivoted to help our membership out and hotel owners all across the country. You know, our member engagement soared out the roof. You know, we developed more than 240 webcasts last year. And out of those 240, 208 of them were COVID-19 specific for our membership industry. You know, and if you compare the touch points that we had compared from 2019 to 2020 with our members, we had about 17,000 touch points in 2019 through our educational offerings. Last year alone, we had probably 50,000 touch points. So you could just see, I know we had to go through a virtual space, but they were really engaged in our educational offerings. We held over 85 virtual events in 2020. And I urge everyone listening, whether you're a member of the association or not, to take advantage of our educational platform. We have an online resource library where it's on demand. You can log on at your convenience to the most pressing issues on a wide variety of topics, whether you are just getting into the industry or you're a seasoned veteran. There's something in that educational platform that's for you. And then on the advocacy front, I think we played a key part for the industry and the ownership when it comes to the CARES Act and PPP. You know, we were in DC's and government elected officials when it came to the waiver of affiliation rule. You know, when PPP and the CARES Act first came out, if you're an owner of one asset or multiple assets, you could only apply for one and you're only eligible for one. So we explained to government that a lot of our owners have more than one asset and they should be eligible for PPP and the CARES Act for all their assets. And they listened and they came up with a waiver for the affiliation rule that we're very proud of. And then we're always partnering up with, you know, like-minded associations like AHLA to kind of, you know, help the industry out. You know, we've did a pledge to protect our guests for our employees and businesses. And then, you know, as Americans, you know, return to normal travel patterns, I think the guests need to have confidence in the hotels and have an environment that's safe for our employees.
That's terrific. Thank you so much. And I would extend the same compliment to you that I've been in this business for a long time, and you know, most of your predecessors were also terrific leaders of AHOA. But I resonate with you saying that you know, you think you're the right man, you know, for this for this task today, and you've done a terrific job, and I know the industry is grateful for that. So listen, the past year, as I said earlier, has clearly been a game changer, and it's an inflection point, if you will. And when life returns to stabilization, I'd like to hear from each of you in terms of whether you perceive we're going to go back to normal, or will normal be a new normal? Biren, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be a new normal. I think some things will come back, to what it was pre-COVID. There's optimism for the future. There's growth. Even though we've gone, I think, in my opinion, the roughest time in our industry, even worse than 9/11 and the recession, I think there's growth. And we'll talk about pipeline, I think, here in this segment. But the pipeline is slowly coming back. Americans are ready to travel again. And as societies and cities evolve, so will hotels. I think society is becoming more transient, and the rise of remote working will occur, and the mobile lifestyles will hopefully be a bigger trend. And as people are getting vaccinated, consumer confidence is growing, and that's where you see occupancy rates are in the last couple of months have increased, and certain segments have done even better than pre-COVID.
Chip, are we going back to normal, or is there a new definition for normal in the future?
A little both. I sound like an economist there, right? It all depends. I think we're going to go back ultimately to a better version of normal. I mean, if you think about what happened prior to the pandemic, you began to see this rise of this idea of an experiential lifestyle. People were, particularly younger people, were more interested in buying experiences than they were buying things. That was driven by human nature. People the world's a smaller place. We're far more connected than we've ever been before. Think about it, Dan, in the days when we were kids, you could probably count on one hand the number of your friends who had traveled to Europe. I think about my kids, and all their friends have become global travelers in some respect. The world's just a smaller place, and that's a good thing. It makes the world a better place. And so I think we're going to continue to see that. People want travel, they want experience. Some of the changes, though, really this began before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic has certainly accelerated this. This notion of bleisure, where you can do business and leisure travel together because you have the technological capabilities of working remotely. Well, that has only been amplified by tenfold over the last year and a half. And so, what we used to consider the weekend business of Friday and Saturday and checking in Friday night and checking out on a Sunday night, that is going to change. I mean, we're already seeing it, as you know, people working from hotels all throughout the day, Friday at the destination where they want to be for the weekend, and maybe not checking out until Monday night. And so these are some of the things that I think are good that will change. My concerns are, will we see the end of the single one-day trips? I hope not. I think the first time a business loses a client because they weren't willing to go somewhere and meet that client face to face, they'll recognize how important it is to travel. But those are the things that concern me. But I think long-term, we're going to be in a better place 10 years from now than we were 10 years ago.
That's great. Chip, maybe you could talk a little bit about what's being done both on the federal and individual state levels to revive travel and tourism in America and to America.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack here, and I'll try to do it as quickly as I possibly can. I think if you heard me do, and I do a lot of interviews, as you know, Dan, if you heard me do these interviews back in January, I had this tale of 2 years where I said the first half of the year was going to be maybe as bad, if not worse, than 2020. And the second half of the year was going to be really the start of the recovery. You've got to accelerate that timeline dramatically, and it accelerates really at about the same pace that we saw the vaccine distribution accelerate. If you recall, we were thinking that you wouldn't get to the point of a majority of American adults being vaccinated until sometime late summer. And because of private industry and what we've been able to do, that got accelerated. So the recovery got accelerated as well. And so when you look at what the federal government has been doing and the state government's been doing, as typical with government, they're usually behind the times. Now you have some states that have really embraced this idea of returning to a normal economy, and they're doing exceptionally well. if you think about, and Dan, you know this, Biren certainly knows this, everybody listening to me probably recognizes this. Once the vaccines got announced and they just began to be distributed, before a vast majority of people had them, people started planning that leisure travel. You saw it happening. Those leisure trips started popping up. And what they were doing is they were planning them for places where they knew they could take a trip. So when you see all the activity that's happening in Florida, Florida's always a great place to go. But some of it is because back when people were planning in February and March to take their spring and early summer vacation, they knew Florida was open, so they planned for it. So kudos to the Florida government, the governor there who kept that place open, and they're reaping the benefits from it. Other places like California, where they're still struggling in some respects, particularly Northern California, is not seeing the same level of leisure travel because there's probably concerns back then about how you plan for that. So we have been encouraging governments across the board, working with the Secretary of Commerce, just had a conversation recently with her team on how do we encourage business travel? Because what we're seeing right now is this enormous pent-up demand of leisure travel. That is going to, we're going to return to normal times on leisure travel at some point, right? Probably right after Labor Day. If we don't have business travel to fill in after that Labor Day, we're going to be in a world of hurt because the lenders are not going to be in such a forgiving mood anymore. There probably won't be financial incentives coming from the federal government. And so we really need to encourage that business travel. And that's what we're working with people on at both the federal level and the state level. You know, that ARP money, a lot of it which came from the federal government down to the state level, a portion of that is meant to help travel and tourism. And so we're strongly urging local elected officials from county up to state officials to use that money to really encourage business travel. But there's one thing that can be done almost immediately that can really help us return to normal with respect to business travel. Actually, two things. One, use technology, because the technology out there is to do rapid testing, allows you to have pretty much any event you want if you'll just use the technology. And two, to my elected official friends, follow the science, right? Open office buildings, open convention centers. You can do it safely. You know you can do it safely because others have already done it. And when that happens and that business travel returns, that will accelerate our entire industry returning to normal faster than the predictions which are for the beginning of 2024.
That's terrific. And I'd like to actually just point out, I was not planning on mentioning this, but the three of us, Biren, Chip, and myself, were at a convention in Atlanta last week, the Hunter Hotel Conference. There were 1,200 people in attendance at this conference. So to your point, Chip, I'm not sure, anybody happen to know, either one of you, is that one of the larger events to have occurred post-pandemic? I don't know. Somebody was asking me recently.
Well, hospitality-wise, no question about it, because the last big one was before that was Alice in the beginning of 2020.
Right.
Just because I'm from Atlanta and I know the governor quite well, I know the folks there. They've had some conferences larger than that, even dating back a few months. But I think to your point, Dan, we proved at Hunter that you can have a large conference using technology, as I know both of you gentlemen had to do along with myself, to have a large, safe conference, and it went exceptionally well.
It did. Chip, you're on I'm sorry, Biren, go ahead.
Just in reference to Hunter, you see the pent-up demand where, you mentioned that there were 1,200 people, attendees. And speaking of Teague, he said that there were probably less than 100 that joined virtually because there was an option to join virtually or in person. And the ratio of less than 100 virtually compared to 1,200 in person just tells us that people are ready to get out.
No question about that. Chip, I believe it was Biren who mentioned the Save Hotel Jobs Act. Perhaps you could just kind of talk briefly about what is it, and if you were a betting man, is it going to get passed?
Well, as Biren knows, I am a betting man because we bet on some sports games ourselves together. But that's another story, probably not appropriate for this dialogue today. Look, Save Hotels Job Act is really important. It's an industry-specific effort to assist the hundreds of thousands of employees in our industry that many of them have been without work for 15 months. Now, what's interesting about this recovery, Dan and Biren, you certainly both know this, is that it's not evenly distributed. It's not even evenly distributed inside a certain state. So take Florida, where everyone thinks that it's booming, and it is. anywhere close to the water, you're probably gonna have a really difficult time finding a hotel. And if you want a job, you can get one starting today by applying in the next 20 minutes. You can start almost immediately. But in places like Tallahassee, even Orlando to a certain respect, where they're heavily reliant on conferences, it's not the same thing. And then, you go to a place like New York or Chicago or other places where they're definitely reliant on business travel and conferences, they're still struggling. So what the Save Hotels Job Act is designed to do is help assist hotel employees across the country. Let me just tell you the mechanics of it real quickly. What you do is you take the 3 months, you can choose any 3 months that you want, 3 months in 2019, and you compare that to 3-month period in 2020. If you saw a 40% decline in your hotel revenue from 2019 to 2020, then you qualify for a grant. It's not a loan, it is a grant. Now, I suspect that means just about every hotel, because everybody got hit by more than 40%, especially when you get to choose the months. That grant is then worth your average total compensation to your employees of up to 3 months worth of total compensation. And so you get that money, and then you have 9 months to spend it on your current employees, or bring back other employees, or give bonuses, or in the case of unemployment insurance, compete to try to get employees to join your team. And so in total value, it's probably somewhere between $15 and $25 billion directed specifically to our industry. It will be an enormous help. It'll be like PPP, but even better. And it's only for hotels. And here's the best part: it's for all hotels. So it doesn't matter if you're a public owned by a public entity, a private entity, because the money goes ultimately to the employees. And so it will help all hotels. It will help all hotel employees, as long as they meet that, the hotel meets that 40% threshold. And we think this could be a huge game changer, especially if we don't see that business travel return that I talked about earlier. And keep in mind, even if it does return, this is an industry that lost last year in 2020, $110 billion. And so under any scenario, when you lose $110 billion, which was more than half of all the revenue generated in 2019, you need some assistance. And so this bill will go a long way towards doing that. We think there's a 50-50 chance that it could happen. It most likely would not happen as a standalone bill. It would have to be attached to a much larger piece of legislation. That's kind of par for the course for all of congressional action right now. But we think there's a 50-50 chance. But if people don't get behind it, if our industry doesn't use hotelsact.org and get a hold of their member of Congress, then it's not going to happen. We've got to rally behind this to make it happen.
So there are a lot of folks on this webinar who are in commercial real estate, but not necessarily focused on hospitality, but they care about their communities. Perhaps you could just go over again what you would ask the folks on this line to do. To go to which website?
It's so easy. hotelsact.org. It takes about 90 seconds to sign up. It's absolutely free. And the easiest way to describe it is this: we create an industry-wide letter or message that we want to go to members of Congress. You put in your name and address. That way we know who your member of Congress is. And when you click yes, the letter goes to the member of Congress that we've already written for you, but it's coming from you. And so that way we're getting a very succinct, specific message to all members of Congress. And we're doing it by the thousands. In fact, since the pandemic began, we've been able to generate over 300,000 of those messages to members of Congress. So just go to hotelsact.org. Again, it's free, it's simple. You can do it in about 90 seconds, and it can definitely make a difference in passing legislation like this.
Thank you. Thank you. So Byron, before I ask you the next question, I'm going to offer you the opportunity to make a bet to challenge Chip. Unless you're at 50-50 as well, I don't know.
In regards to what?
The passage of Save Hotels Job Act.
Oh yeah. So as Chip mentioned, I'm optimistic with the efforts of AHLA and association like AHOA that it's going to take us a little while, but to get in the elected officials' ears, I think that with a united effort, I think that I'm positive it can happen.
Great. All right, Byron, maybe you could talk about the hotel investment climate in the recent past, today, and what you see in the near term. And as you talk about that, perhaps you can also talk about development pipeline for new hotels.
Yeah. So, as we're now in mid-May, I'm getting a good amount of calls from brokers asking me to price my hotels. They want to price my hotels because buyers, I mean, it's a seller's market right now. And the buyer activity has picked up very quickly. The problem here is that there's not enough inventory to fill the demand that's been created. The big shift is now in how asking prices are determined. With the rise of construction costs and inflation of almost 20, 30%, asking prices have gone up by almost 10, 15%, even though the revenues have not picked up to pre-COVID levels. Hotels are now trading on a per key basis as replacement costs continue to go up. I think the good news is, I know Chip touched on this a little bit, but I'm hearing from a good amount of our members that the banks have opened up to hotel financing somewhat. What was priced at maybe 12 million is now priced at maybe 14 million. And it's every seller raising their prices. And a lot of buyers were sitting on cash during the pandemic thinking that they will pick up foreclosed properties at 30 to 50 cents on the dollar. And that wave of foreclosures never hit. Now it'll be interesting to see what happens in the rest of this year, of how that foreclosure market hits. Because when you talk about CMBS and stuff like that, those they still need relief. And then we talk about, there were several buyers or sellers that were in the 1031, and they need to spend that money. And that's something that we need to talk about as far as government advocacy. But I think the number one point is that everywhere they're talking about replacement cost. And then when you talk about the future of the pipeline, I mean, in the United States, the hotel supply is tracking growth of almost probably 2% this year and probably 2% next year. And the pipeline appears to be recovering from this pandemic. Even with the transaction probably volume almost down maybe 60% last year, average selling price per room in Q1 was very close to probably 2019 levels, Dan.
And there's been a rapid comeback. There was a rapid decline in terms of perceived value right when the pandemic hit, and there's been a tremendous rapid rebound. Chip, the AHLA was really at the forefront of promoting new standards for hotel cleanliness and sanitation. Perhaps you could just talk a little bit about that. Was one of the early initiatives, and I'm curious. Do you think there should be an industry-wide protocol for cleaning guest rooms?
Wow, that second question is a little dangerous, but I'll answer it. But let me hit on the first one first. One of the things we do is we use a national polling group called Morning Consult. We think they're the best in the business, and we're constantly finding out, kind of feeling the pulse of what's happening in our industry, especially with consumers. And what we recognized right out of the gate when the pandemic hit is that cleanliness and safety vaulted from being like the 5th concern for people staying in a hotel to the number 1 concern by almost everybody. And so we responded by creating what's known as the Safe Stay Advisory Council, which brought together AHOA, along with folks like Ecolab, who as you know, sell the majority of the cleaning products to our industry, but also every major brand, major management groups like Aimbridge, ownership groups, brought them all together and said, look, can we create a set of safety and cleaning guidelines that can be applied across the board, recognizing that some hotels may want to go above and beyond. That's perfectly fine. If you want to take additional steps, that's great. But how can we set those basic guidelines? And we were able to do that with Safe Stay and working with folks like Ecolab to make sure that we were implementing the best products and the best practices. And then we took those guidelines actually to the CDC and had them review them to make sure that what we were doing was actually working. We have since revised the Safe Stay guidelines 5 times. We went from just cleaning surfaces to cleaning the air to what are we doing on masks to what are we doing with meetings and events. And so those are free on our website. You can check them out. We even created checklists for people to use at the property level if you'd like to do so. We created signage that you can use and put around your hotel. But it has worked. It has worked to convey that message to both guests and employees that hotels are safe and clean. And it's worked with elected officials because we use these guidelines to go to elected officials and say, hey, we don't really need government mandates on this because we've actually already got this covered, and let us show you what we're doing. And for the most part, elected officials have looked at it and said, you're doing a great job, just keep doing it. And so we think that it has really worked well. Now, as we move forward, will there be industry guidelines across the board on cleaning? I don't know that there will be on specifically cleaning surfaces and cleaning rooms. What I do think may happen is similar to what you see in restaurants. You know, when you walk into a restaurant, you see that score up on the wall. You might begin seeing that in all commercial buildings with respect to air quality. Not necessarily, you know, they're going to go in and check every room, but testing the air to make sure you have good air quality. That might be something that we see not just in hotels, but in commercial spaces everywhere. And I think from a consumer standpoint, that would be a welcome addition.
Thank you. So the you know, the work from home phenomenon and Zoom, like we're doing now, I mean, let's face it, it's a thing. I think you would agree too that it's not necessarily going away, irrespective of the fact that people do want to, you know, see each other in person. There is nothing like doing that. But what do you see as the long-term effects of work from home and this use of technology, which I find very interesting, because if you think about it, you know, Skype has been around for quite some time. And then Zoom just became this huge thing when the pandemic hit. In any event, the question is, what, if any, are the long-term effects that you see on relative to, you know, business, group, and convention segments? Which one of you would like to tackle that? Baron?
Yeah, I'll start. So, you know, when you talk about work from home, I like to call it remote work, because, you know, who says you have to work at your home? You know, if you're fortunate enough to maybe be able to work remotely when the quarantine and travel restrictions are finally a thing of the past, I think you can work just from about anywhere with a solid Wi-Fi connection, such as our industry, hotels, right? Leisure travel, I think, will continue to lift the recovery. I think that, you know, business travel as we know it will be reimagined. And then rather than traveling for business, yeah, I think newly vaccinated remote workers may seek out new destinations from which to work remotely. And I've even read that, you know, some of them are even creating a work from home package, right, to try to get people into hotels. And then I think that, you know, the business travel seems like it's only going to recover 70 to 80% to pre-pandemic levels. So I think we're going to kind of have to look into a hybrid version of kind of remote work. And then when you talk about Zoom and stuff like that, you know, I personally, I think Zoom is still going to be there, but I think that people are zoomed out and people want to see that in-person interaction, right? And whether we talk about conventions like Hunter or a HOA convention coming up, nothing replaces those interactions in person. I think that some companies will still try to cut on some kind of cost and do this, you know, still continue their communications through Zoom. But I think that in sales and everything else, that you just can't get that same engagement. I'll be honest with you from my end, you know, as the chairman of the association, Dan and Chip, it's hard to empower and motivate people through Zoom. You know, hosting board meetings or having in-person events, I think is just a whole different impact. So I think that depends on your company. I think that it's going to have to evolve.
Yeah, Dan,
go ahead, Chip.
There too, because I
Please.
think this is such an important question. I think we're in the middle of a pendulum swing, right? Obviously, the pendulum swung one direction because of lockdowns, and everybody had to go to Zoom. Right? All in person was canceled. Now it's swinging back, and I think there's the pent up demand, as we talked about leisure travel. There's the pent up demand to see people that you've had relationships with, and I think that's why, you know, Biren was talking about it earlier. At Hunter, 1,200 people in person, and only, you know, less than 100 doing it virtually when they had that option. It's because people want to see their friends they haven't seen in a year or so. We're probably going to reach some sort of equilibrium. And what does that equilibrium look like? Well, I think if it's a meeting or a very small event that is not one that requires a sale, but you're just meeting with somebody. So those type of one-day trips, some of those are going to be replaced with technology. There's no question about it. But on the flip side of that, as I mentioned earlier, as Biren appropriately described a moment ago, it is work from anywhere, right? And so you can work from that hotel. So being able to work remotely in the place that you want to spend the weekend, or you know, particularly next weekend, coming up on an extended weekend with Memorial Day, how many people you think across the country will be working from a hotel next Friday? A lot, right? And so I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that. And so does it balance each other out? The disappearance of the one-day trip by the enhanced leisure travel? I don't know. That remains to be seen. But the pendulum, we're in the middle of a pendulum swing, and we'll be in equilibrium at some point in the next few years.
Terrific. Let's just talk a minute about Airbnb. Interesting topic in that, clearly before the pandemic, Airbnb was having an impact on the lodging sector, particularly in downtown urban 24/7 cores. It is interesting that when the pandemic hit, they ran into a little bit of a rough patch financially, had to go out and get 2 rounds of fairly expensive money, and then they ended up going public during the pandemic. So it seems like they're back better than ever. I guess the question is, do you see Airbnb continuing to impact the fundamentals of the hotel sector?
Byron, why don't you take that one first?
Yeah, I do. I think that they're definitely going to, it affects the hotel industry. It's going to vary on the traveler, right? Personally, like myself, if I'm going with the family somewhere on a leisure travel, I probably prefer to stay at a hotel. But now if I'm going on a, let's say, fantasy football trip with the guys, then I might be renting out something on, with Airbnb. But I think that the biggest issue is they're here to stay, like we've always thought since they first came in as an impact to the industry. But our concern from the industry, and I know Chip will kind of elaborate on this, is that they need to play by the same, rules as we do. And that's unfortunate that government still can't see that the rules and regulations that we have to abide by, they need to. And that's, I think, more of our concern than if they're going to be, affecting our industry. Because they're definitely a player in our industry. I just think that we need to concentrate more on not worried about how much are they going to affect our industry, but hey, make them play by the same rules that we are.
Yeah, Dan, Byron's so right about that. And I think it's important to differentiate between short-term rentals and Airbnb, because there are lots of short-term rental companies that play by the same rules as hotels. In fact, we have short-term rental companies that are members of AHLA because they are playing by the same rules, competing on a level playing field. I always find it funny that elected officials sometimes will say, well, you just don't want the competition. And I have to remind them at every major intersection in America, there are probably 3 to 4 different hotel brands competing for guests at that same intersection. We are not afraid of competition. You can find it 10,000 places across the US, but it's got to be fair. You have to play by the same rules. And Airbnb just simply doesn't want to do that. They spend millions and millions of dollars lobbying elected officials in order to not play by the same rules. Take the state of Florida, for example. Now, imagine yourself as a business owner or even an individual taxpayer getting the same tax treatment that Airbnb does. In Florida, what Airbnb does is they send a check to the state government, and it's their own estimate of what they believe they owe, and there's no ability of the government to even audit them. Now, how much would you pay in taxes if you got to just send in what you think you owe and have no chance of being audited? It's absolutely silly that they get away with this, but they do. And now that they're a public company, they have so much more money. They have even more resources to lobby to maintain this unfair, unlevel playing field. And it's why it's important that our industry stand up and say, look, bring on the competition every day, all day, but let's play on the exact same playing field.
Thank you. It's about 1:46 here. I think we may have a Q&A session. If not, I do have other topics that I'd love to visit with you gentlemen on. So, Michelle, where are we at this point?
Sorry, Dan. So we got a few questions that came in. Actually, one is coming a little bit, duplicating a little bit here, but it's actually for both. And the question relates to impact or effects if the Biden tax plan eliminating the 1031 exchange were to become law. What would be the impact here? I mean, it's got to be major.
Yeah, Chip, if I may, I think that this tax proposal is huge for our industry, and it's how it's going to affect us, right? I mean, they've capped it at $500,000 profit from real estate. And like-kind exchanges, we have been an integral part along with HLA when it comes to 1031. Like-kind exchanges are vital to building one's business in the hotel industry, especially owners members of our association. Whether they own a 40, 50 room property and then they reinvest it and buying an 80 to 100 room property. But with the current proposal of the $500,000 cap, it prevents us or handcuffs us from trying to scale and grow. And the most important thing is to employ more jobs, right? And so we're trying to talk to elected officials that this cap needs to be a lot larger. We're trying to shoot for about 25 million to hopefully maybe settle for something in between. But 500,000 is nothing.
Yeah, it's the worst. One of the worst examples of just bad policy, and it's policy that is not meant to do anything except this really it's maddening and in many ways disgraceful idea that we're going to punish people using the tax code. Keep in mind the tax code is meant to raise revenue for the purposes of government. It's not meant to play favorites. It's not meant to punish people you don't like or people you think got an unfair advantage. I mean, that is terrible politics. The like-kind exchange has been around for a century, 100 years. This thing has been working. Now, could you make the case a few years ago that there were things, assets that were being used in like-kind exchanges that were never part of the original intent, which was real estate? Absolutely. But you know what? That was revised. And so now like-kind exchanges are used almost exclusively for real estate transactions, which is why they were created. And if you really think about it, it's nothing more than inventory. I mean, if you were buying and selling real estate, that's your inventory. And if you get taxed every time you have a transaction, all that does is reduce transactions. And when you reduce real estate transactions, all you're doing in our broader economy is eliminating the best and highest use for property. Well, we all benefit when real estate is used for its best and highest use. If you have a piece of real estate that is sitting there and not providing a benefit for that local community because the owner is unwilling to sell it to create that transaction because they can't use a 1031 exchange anymore, you're hurting the whole community. It's terrible policy. It's not well thought out. It's I don't know. It's envy politics at its worst, and this should not happen.
Another question. What is your take on Monopoly CoStar acquiring STR? Either one of you.
I don't know that I have an opinion on that. I talked to my friends at STR. They seem to be quite happy where they are. So, and we work with them every day, and we've had no difference in our relationship. And in fact, they may even be more helpful than they were, if that's possible. So I wouldn't want to comment on their relationship.
And your take this time on 10X and options versus distressed direct acquisition.
So Michelle, I think that it just depends on what type of buyer you are. I'll give you my personal example. I've never bought an asset through an auction. Last month, there were properties here in Texas that were on the 10X platform. And I didn't buy any, I didn't end up buying any, but I partook in it, right? I looked at it, I looked at how the process works, and it just depends on the numbers, right? I mean, either going through a platform like that where, there's a bidding process, or going through a broker, and you know what the price is and negotiating that, it's gonna vary on the individual investor. Personally, I'm open to both. It depends on the numbers, right? And I created a threshold on each asset of how much we're going to go up to. And if it goes past that, we're not going to get sucked into the bidding war. And then we got out of it. But you just kind of have to set a target and not fluctuate if you're going through that auction type or bidding type process.
I have another question here, more in terms of planning. As an architecture firm that has worked in various hotel projects, can you speak to what you're seeing in regards to PIPs? It is our understanding that they'll be deferred they've been deferred in 2020 and 2021. Do you anticipate a pickup of the PIPs?
Yeah, so I think that when we talk about PIP, we just had several meetings with our brand partners here in the last 30 days. And we discussed the re-implementation of brand standards. And that's the fear of a lot of our membership, that we're not out of the pandemic completely and there's still a lot of struggle. So we're worried that our brands going to start re-implementing these sooner than later. And when you talk about specifically about PIPs, I think that they're looking at it where if you were already not in compliance before the pandemic, then they're going to try to enforce it. But if you were in compliance before the pandemic and your PIP is coming up, they'll work with you on an individual basis. On the flip side, Michelle, I think that there were a good amount of people who did their PIPs in the downturn, because when we're coming out to the road to recovery, they're ready, because now when your rooms are ready for your inventory's there, you can start selling to make up the loss you had in 2020, right? Instead of now doing the PIP when the demand's coming up. So I think that was a smart move for the people who did it during the downturn.
You know, Michelle, if I could just jump in here a second, I think this might be a good inflection point to talk about labor shortages. And we all know that all sectors of the economy are experiencing the effects of labor shortages. I'm involved in a portfolio of hotels that several of the assets have reopened quite rapidly. There's not enough staff to clean rooms, such that the demand is there for 100% of the rooms to be available, but there's nobody to clean them, right? And so we're asking managers, salespeople, directors of engineering to clean rooms, which is really not what they do, and so it takes longer. And so in some markets and some assets, there's actually enough demand to fill a hotel for a night, but there's not enough labor to clean the rooms. So I don't know, Biren, Chip, I don't know if either one of you want to sort of talk about that and you know, how that's affecting the sector today.
It's incredibly damaging. I had dinner last night with a member of the U.S. Senate. I'm not going to tell you who it was, but I was mentioning to that member that, you know, we went about 13 months of not having guests, and now that we have guests, we're in our second or third month of not having employees to serve those guests. So at the very time where we're trying to make up the revenue, the 110 billion that was lost in 2020, we can't do so because we're having to close down portions of hotels just because there's not enough labor. Now, why is there not enough labor? Well, there's no question about it. Unemployment benefits, the enhanced unemployment benefits are doing it. Amazon becoming the largest private employer in the United States. And that's happening. I mean, and so many people leaving the workforce during the pandemic, deciding to retire. That's all playing a major role. But keep in mind, before the pandemic, we had 900,000 job openings in our industry before things got bad. It's even worse right now. And so it's clearly impacting operations. We surveyed our entire membership recently. The numbers were staggering. 93% had job openings. Of those 93% that had job openings, almost 2/3, about 63%, said that the number of job openings they had were actually impacting their ability to operate as a fully functioning hotel. And that is a sad story to tell, especially when you're just trying to recover from a pandemic.
Go ahead, Michelle.
It's okay.
I have actually a question that can piggyback, I guess, on just what we talked about here. So how have costs of running hotels changed with COVID? Also, what sorts of investments have been needed to upgrade hotels so that they were safe as and just like other types of properties like office space has already incurred extra cost to running them, obviously, and has been changed by the COVID. What's happened? What's actually impacting here the hotel industry in terms of the extra costs and of running hotels now? What has been changing to upgrade the hotels as to being safer?
Well, Michelle, I think that, yeah. So I think that, Michelle, that during the pandemic, it's kind of made us step our game up as hotel owners. You know, we were at a pre-COVID, we were at an all-time low as far as unemployment. Business, our industry for the last 5 to 8 years was really good, and kind of you get complacent. So you have to look at your company again, and gave us a chance to evaluate how we can do better in operations, right? I think that as far as cost, we're talking to our brand partners about kind of reducing some of the amenities. Is in breakfast, for example, is that many items needed, right? A lot of us went to grab and go during the pandemic. Can we go to a hybrid version as we're coming out of the pandemic? Housekeeping, opt in, opt out. Should we charge a fee if somebody wants housekeeping? Technology, I think that when you have either mobile check-ins or keyless entries or with your phones, that can save some cost. I know that there were some brands that were requiring some, multiple people to run their breakfast, and it's hard to find labor to begin with. How can you have multiple people? So I think they're getting it. I think that owners have been more efficient and smarter of how they would cut costs. But at the same time, you have to give consumer confidence to come into your hotels. And how do you do that? Making sure that you have a clean hotel, number one, right? And you're following the sanitation or the cleanliness protocols that AHLA has worked on, AHO has worked on, to make them feel comfortable. And you're going to incur that cost, whether it's sanitizing machines or things in the rooms that you're going to give, and then keeping your common areas cleaned multiple times a day to make that feel comfortable. So you're going to incur costs, but we're trying to, as the profit margins are shrinking in the hotel industry, in my opinion, we're going to have to start raising rates. ADR is going to have to start coming back to kind of offset that cost.
Dan, maybe you want to ask the last question here. Maybe just before, actually, Dan, I have a couple of questions asking that website, Chip, again, hotel.
Hotels, that's plural, hotels act, ACT.org.
ACT.org. Yeah. Thank you. Dan?
Okay. Well, this really has been terrific. Given that we're in the hospitality sector, I never met anybody in the hotel business who was not an optimist at heart. If you're negative, you don't make it in the hotel space. So I always like to end on sort of a high note. And perhaps both of you could just take a quick minute and talk about what you see as the most encouraging trends for the U.S. lodging sector. Biren, you want to start?
So, one thing that gives me optimism in our industry is that we are resilient, right? No matter what has happened, whether, as I mentioned earlier, 9/11 or the recession, we're resilient. None of us anticipated something like this that's health related. We always talked about, Danny, you and I have been on panels in the past where when's a recession coming, right? But this was something that no one anticipated. And so I think during this time, we have shown tremendous resiliency. It's made us unite even more than ever before. Owners, brands, vendors working together to ensure everyone comes out on the other side has been positive. And I think that obviously, as we discussed earlier in this panel, that there are going to be some changes made, and we're just going to have to make smarter decisions to have a product that's efficient, that's profitable for owners, to keep going.
That's great. And Chip, obviously same question for you, and perhaps you might be able to elaborate since Biren brought up uniting together, right? The Save Hotels Job Act, and for people that are on the line who are not aware, the hotel sector has fairly strong labor unions in major 24/7 markets. And Chip, maybe you could talk about how the unions and AHLA have collaborated together, and to Biren's point, and also just what you see as encouraging trends for the future.
Look, we have and will always have our battles with the unions, and we shouldn't hide from that, and they're certainly not hiding from that. But when we find issues where we agree, we need to work together, and we've done that in the past on things like illegal short-term rentals, and we're doing it right now in supporting hotel employees. We know that the backbone, the heartbeat of our industry are the employees that make it so special. We understand that. Our friends at Unite here understand that. And that's why when we created the Save Hotel Jobs Act, we did it together. We just sent a letter to every member of Congress that was jointly signed by AHLA and Unite Here. We did a press conference that had over 45 million media impressions with myself and the head of Unite Here, Dee Taylor. We believe that's the first time, by the way, that the head of AHLA and the head of Unite Here have ever done an event like that. So tough times can help people find common ground. But you know what else tough times do? And this is really my optimistic moment. It helps us prioritize. And what you've seen us do as a country, as a world, really, in the last year and a half is prioritize relationships over things. And that's why I'm so confident that this industry is going to return. Because if you think back to the sayings you've said to yourself over the last 12 months, I can't imagine anyone saying, you know, I really wish I'd have bought another television. No, but what you probably have said is, I really wish I could go visit with this person or that person, because we began to understand how that human interaction is at the core of who we are as human beings, and that we need it. We need that one-on-one engagement. We need to be person to person. And because of that, and because we've now prioritized that and realized how important it is in each of our lives, I think that's ultimately going to lead to more travel. As I mentioned a moment ago, the world's becoming a smaller place. We are connected digitally like never before. And that makes us want to draw closer together in real life. And so I think we're going to see more travel come out of this.
Excellent. Gentlemen, again, thank you so much. Really appreciate your taking the time to visit with our membership of the Councils of Real Estate. You are both scholars and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Well, thank you so much, Dan, Iran, and Chip. These last 15 months clearly represented a difficult and transformative period for the hotel and hospitality industry. Yet the resiliency of the sector will be reflected in a long time investor confidence in this dynamic asset class. On-demand recording are available for most What's Next sessions, including today's. I encourage everyone to visit cre.org/webinars for information on other topical and thought-provoking programs in development, including a special presentation on June 16th on the economic outlook from a European perspective. Until then, on behalf of the Councilors of Real Estate, thank you for attending this session of What's Next for Real Estate and the Life Experience. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job. What a finale, Chip. That's good.
Thank you. I got to run. I'm late on a 2
All
o'clock.
right.
Really appreciate being with you guys.
Thank you, Chip.
Dan, see you
Thank
soon.
you.
Dan, really appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hope it lived up to expectations.